All right, what's up, everybody? It's ill.Gates reporting for duty. 4 producers, 1 sample. Way better than 2 girls, 1 cup. Way more watchable. All right, thanks to Andrew Huang for inviting me to do this. I'm really, really excited. So for this particular edition, our sample is a 7-second sample of a door. That is being, that door being closed is a squeaky door. This is the sample.
ill.Gates. May is everybody in?
It was a real challenge. I've never used a sample that dodgy. It was a sample from a cell phone video. There's all kinds of MP4 compression. It was in mono. There's background noise, distortion. It was a real nightmare. And it wouldn't even open in Ableton. You couldn't drag the cell phone video into Ableton. Ableton was corrupted file. Forget about it. Check it out. First thing that happens, watch when I drag it into Ableton. File corrupt or unlicensed, not allowed to go into Ableton. That was a real challenge. And so I started listening to the sample and I was like, wow, this sample is really dirty and really raw and really kind of harsh and pretty hardcore on the ears. So, I had to extract the audio out of it. And I was just listening to it and I was like, man, this thing's mono, this thing's rough. It's there's all this MP4 compression and background noise. What do I do? So the natural choice is to open it up in the fantastic software iZotope RX. Okay, so I loaded it in and I tried doing all these different processes on it. There it was with some wind removal, some spectral noise, some vocal denoise. So I ran a bunch of processing on it, and then I was like, you know what? I'm getting okay results out of this, but this is a challenge. This sample is in really rough shape. Yeah, here's my best one. And here it is without reverb. So I scratched my head a bit and then I was like, I know what I'll do. I'll email iZotope and I'll tell them that it's going to be in a video from the world famous YouTuber Andrew Huang, and tell them that it'd be a good look for them to really, show off their software. And I got iZotope to clean the sample for me. Thank you, iZotope. You guys are the best. I'm decent with their software, but I didn't make the software. So they did a way better job than I did because they've made the software. And they handed me back the sample. And I was like, this is great. So here's the best I could get it. It's got rid of the background noise, but I feel it's a bit more too processed. So these are the iZotope ones. They're way better.
DMT blend with heart and soul and syringes, something that you hear within the dirty project hinges. Freak, let it squeak, so I know you're so centered, center, painted a magenta, placenta, anyone I would.
So, I was thinking about how do I do this, right? And I think the obvious thing to do would be to take it and make a serum wavetable out of it and put lots of effects and kind of smooth it out and make it sound nice. Or, take a single cycle waveform, which I did do later, but, you can take a single cycle waveform and make a synth out of anything. And I thought that while that might have technically been making the track out of the door hinge sample, I felt that it kind of you can do that with any sound, and I don't think it would be recognizable to someone who had never, had their mind opened to single cycle waveforms and serum wavetable making. That I don't think it would have been obviously connected to the door hinge sample at all. So I was listening to the sound, and when you listen to sound, you know, without the video, you just listen to it. It's not obviously a door hinge at all. You know, it could be like a kookaburra or like some crazy person laughing or something. Like there's nothing about it, the actual sound that screams door hinge either. So when I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, well, I want to use the sound in the rawest possible way so that it's still very clearly recognizable as the original source sound to someone who's not necessarily a music producer. B, I want to make a track that stands up with the rest of my discography that I can play out live. That's not just like a beat I made for this YouTube video. I want it to be like a real ill.Gates track. And, you know, I wanted it to incorporate the door hinge, not just at a sonic level, but at a conceptual level, right? So, you know, when I made it, the first thing I did was I made a bunch of timer beats. So I made these all in like half an hour. Here's another version of the beat. Right, here's another version of the beat. Now, every morning as a training exercise, I get up and I use this app, Seconds Pro, and I've made a little list of actions that I take, a little workflow that I take, where it's like,
chop sample onto pads for 5 minutes. Make several sequences for 5 minutes. Add beats plus build-ups for 5 minutes.
etc. Right? And that takes, if I stick to, you know, ruthlessly what it says in the app, I'll have a track in half an hour. They might not all be good, but it's enough to get an idea out and to flesh the idea out. So I did that like I think 3 different times, and then I chose the best one. I made sure to use the sample in a raw way, and every single section is based very directly on the sample. I tried to use it with as little processing as possible so you could still tell it was the door hinge sample. So I loaded the door in. There's very little processing. There's a little bit of reverb and some fat rack, and that's it. So then this is the door kind of, you know, this is the foundation of the track. And then it goes into. And then. And that basically provided the foundation of it. Alright, so after I got my sample cleaned up by iZotope, thank you iZotope, iZotope RX, best software ever, then I loaded it into Reaper and set a bunch of different cue points and put them on this teeny tiny little memory card. It's a wafer thin. And then I put it into my Make Noise Morphogene module for some granular synthesis. Make Noise Morphogene is just such a breakthrough module. If you are at all into granular, that is the one to own. All right, so then I loaded it up on the memory card and then went through my reels, and I'll go through my reels here. And that was the one I decided I liked the sound of the best of all the different cleaned ones. So now let's go to normal mode here. And now we're in normal mode. So this is the playback speed control. This organized one chooses which slice And then gene size changes the grain size, and then the morph changes how those grains are manifest. So here we go. You can see that that can go both forwards and backwards. And I decided that was my best chop. So that was the one I was going to use. And then I went and turned the gene size down to create a granular effect. And opening up this granular effect gave me a kind of cool door hinge effect that I used a few times in the track. Check it out. And that'll sound different depending on which slice you're using. So that one had that nice transient at the beginning. So I believe that was the one I ended up using the most. So once I did that, I had like a pretty nice sort of a bass tone. And I decided that I wanted to make it sound a little bit more synthesizer-y. So I decided to use my amazing new Make Noise QPOS filter. So let's plug it into the filter and then plug the filter into the output so we can hear what's going on. So now this filter is really cool. QPOS stands for Quad Peak Animation System. And that means that there's basically 4 separate filters that are working together in stereo. So unlike many modules, most of these modules are mono, but the stereo, like the Morphogene is stereo and the QPOS are stereo, and having slightly different, like when you use a multiple filter, think of it like 2 lips on a mouth. And when you have like a band pass and a low pass working together, you get that kind of vowel vocal formant sort of effect. Well, the QPOS does that, but like times 4. So it's really crazy. So I'm going to start with the radiate controls and the resonance down and just show you what it sounds like opening and closing as a filter. So it's already like a pretty nice low pass filter. Let's give it a bit of resonance here. So it's already got a bit of that acid effect. And then when I use these radiate controls, it made the acidy sort of multi-filter effect all stereo and open up in stereo. Right? So then I routed an LFO to it. And that was how I made all those acidy, modular, analog sounding synth noises out of the sample. I used the Make Noise Morphogene for my granular synthesis, and I used the Make Noise QPOS to add that acidy analog juice that made the sound fun and exciting. So I basically set a timer and just gave myself an hour to make modular sounds, and then loaded those modular sounds into a drum rack. So that allowed me to cut the sounds up. I'll take the filter off. And there's a bunch of different. Right? So you can see these were cut up to make the riffs. And then I doubled them up with a recording of my Moog analog synth, my Moog Little Fatty, and I made subs. Part of what makes those subs sound good is this erosion effect. You hear that a lot in like neuro-based music, that erosion on the subs. But that, that really, gave me the ability to make riffs quickly out of this, like, because like modular, it's kind of hard to tame, you get a lot of chaotic sounds out of a modular. So loading them into a drum rack like MPC style and making your riffs with chops of the modular sounds is a lot easier than making like a MIDI riff. And you just get stuff that sounds a lot more musical. So then all together we got this riff. And then open the next door. And then the next door is here. And this one is really, really directly from the door. So here's the door sound with no processing. So I wanted to add a sub. So I just made another layer in the rack with a sub. Then I wanted to EQ it a bit. And then get rid of some of the harshness with this Brainworks Refinement plugin. And then get some of the highs back with this OTT. Give it some stereo width with wider. And then give it some movement with these parallel peak filtering rack that I made. And then on the group itself, there's some sub side chain. Most of these other racks are inactive, but those are just like solo or mute or filter or whatever for when I need it. But this one, this bass sound is the most recognizable as the door. Right, and then here's another bass sound. And then I doubled that up with a little bit of analog filter wobble. That's the Three Sisters filter running over plates. Mutable Instruments plates is the oscillator for that. And then here, I made another section where it's just pure acid fest. You can see it's a pretty big difference in the way the sub is behaving. This sub is a lot different than this sub. So this is more of like a dubstep sub where it matches the top bass, and then in the second drop, or this is the third drop, I guess, the sub and the tops were very different. So yeah. So this is where I did a lot of the songwriting, was in this project. The drums are all pretty standard. This is just like a drum kit that I made with 128s, where, if you want to change one of the sounds, each one of these sounds has 128. So let's say I want to change that kick or this crash, I could just change the MIDI note that is sent here. And then you can get different crashes. So I built a whole drum rack of these 128 style sampler multis, and then I was really easily able to kind of like pick a kit that fit what was going on with the sample. I also used some more erosion, more of that wide noise erosion on the drums, really kind of opens up the highs and makes it sound a little dirtier and a bit more rattly. And then a lot of the power of the drums is coming from this drum bus plugin here, the Ableton built-in drum bus. I got the transients up, a little bit of compression, a little bit of saturation. This is it before. And then this is with the drum bus. Bangs, and it's just a built-in Ableton plugin. It's amazing. So I sequenced up the drums. I played all those parts in. Well, I pretty much played all the parts in with my hands. But that's basically where those are at, where those sounds are at. But yeah, the door, it's mostly all about the sample chops. Like I sequenced the sample chops first, and then sequenced everything around the sample chops.
And then
So I was like, look, I need to trigger the image of a door hinge in the mind of the listener. I need to really make that clear. So compositionally, I wanted to make it so that all of the sections started with like a door or like a kind of glitch edit or like a, you know, so there's some spaceship doors, there's some hatches, there's just all these different kinds of doors. And each section, a door opens, and then you're in that section for a while, and then you open a door and go to the next sections. These are just the door sounds. These are all sounds that directly came from the door. And then it gets into this. So you can see pretty much the whole track is really directly based on the door. Door is used pretty raw throughout, and then I leave it raw at the very end here. And yeah, so it's really, there's definitely a whole lot of door going on. But I thought, like, you know, that's all cool, but that stuff's all pretty abstract. You know, I want to really very directly communicate door hinge imagery. So, you know, if you want to communicate, you need a voice. And one of the people that I just cannot get enough of working with is my man Mayor Apeshit. Big up Mayor Apeshit. He's an excellent vocalist, and one of his superpowers is that he's very visual with his lyrics. Like, he says stuff and images pop up in your mind's eye whether you like it or not. So I knew he was the man to call. So I called him up, we brainstormed some lyrics, and you know, one of the lyrics that became the title of the track that I thought was really strong was 6 feet deep when your front door squeak.
6 feet deep when your front door squeak.
Which recontextualizes the door hinge from being like a wacky sample we're using for a YouTube video to a scary horror movie Foley thing, because it's like, oh, the door's opening, I'm gonna die, right? So I thought that was really great. And then, you know, because we wanted it to be raw, dirty, dark, hardcore, psychedelic, crazy, you know, so I wrote the my shit slams like the door to your future line.
My shit slams like the door to your future.
And then I was like, door hinge, this is a chance to rhyme with door hinge, because it's one of the only words that rhymes with orange.
Anyone I roll won't kick the door in. Citrus when I speak, squeak, Agent Orange.
And then we brainstormed a bunch of different kind of like psychedelic doors kind of references. So we referenced like Jim Morrison, Aldous Huxley, Timothy Leary, DMT.
Let me turn the handle for you, Jim Morrison, Timothy Leary, with the key to your mind's door, son. DMT blend with heart and soul and syringes, something that you hear within the dirty project hinges.
You know, we're also thinking like birth is a doorway, hence the magenta placenta line.
Enter, painted a magenta placenta.
So we really tried to make sure that all of the lines were as directly connected to the door hinge as possible. And then as for vocal processing, I did a little bit of Little Altar Boy on the vocal to make it sound a bit more processed and cool. Here, I'll unfreeze this so you can hear it. So this is without Little Altar Boy.
Turn the handle for you, Jim Morrison's Timothy Leary.
But I really wanted the vocal to sit back in the mix more so that the door hinge could come forward, so I put this Little Altar Boy on it.
Turn the handle for you, Jim Morrison's Timothy Leary, with the key to your mind's door, son.
Just makes it a little bit more, it just makes it a little bit more kind of mushy. So I wanted the vocal to be a bit more mushy so that the door hinge could kind of come through a little bit more sharply, because I wanted the mix to be really like all about that door hinge. But yeah, so this is how it sounded at this point.
Turn the handle for you, Jim Morrison's Timothy Leary with the key to your mind's door, son. DMT blend with heart and soul and syringes. Something that you hear within the dirty project hinges. Sleep, let it squeak, so I know you're so centered. Sleep 6 feet deep when your front door squeak. Open up your mind, baby. 6 feet deep, 6 feet deep. 6 feet deep, 6 feet deep.
So that version of the track is pretty cool, but the mix is a bit rough. It just doesn't really sound finished. And I find the trick to finishing most of the MIDI parts into stems, and doing that allowed me to edit them a lot more accurately. And then it also allowed me to have my processor resources freed up for bringing, because like, let's say you want to use some really fancy EQ that takes half your processor to use. If you've maximized your, if you've got a million plugins going and all these MIDI channels, a lot of the time your processor is just so taxed from running all that stuff that you can't really, you don't have the headroom to run all your nicer plugins. So you can see here, all the subs have been flattened, all the basses have been flattened, all the vocals have been flattened, all the sample chops have been flattened, everything has been flattened, including much of the drums, but the main kick is still MIDI because it's triggering a bunch of side chains. But a lot of these other samples, they're all audio at this point. There's no more MIDI. And that helped me to be able to load better plugins. So then in here, what I did was I loaded in this. The main difference is these checkers, and these checkers, these are all like little checkerboard squares that come in over top of the rest of the track and kind of add little glitches and other edits. So check it. Well, actually, you know what? Yeah. Well, here, I'll play this and then I'll show you something else. So all that stuff really adds a lot to the beat. I'll play it without and then with. But you can see now with. But those little checkerboard pieces, they're providing a lot of accents on the beat and really helping it to just everything slam that much more, because there's little reverses going into the big transients. There's little glitches over top of all those special moments, etc. One thing that I find really useful when you're doing that sort of a thing is to use the actual crossfader on Ableton to make room for your little checkerboard pieces. So you can see here I've set a lot of the channels are set to crossfader side B, which means that when I automate that crossfader, it's going to mute, it's going to mute all my hi-hats, it's going to mute my hand claps, it's going to mute the basses, it's going to mute the sample chops, and then it makes room for the other sounds.
Open up your mind, baby.
Right here. So it makes room for all those little accents and stuff, and that crossfader trick is one that I just use all the time. So now all these mangled pieces, this is a mud pie that I made where I took the mix down for the track and just put tons and tons of effects until I got audio that sounded like this. Or and then once again, I use the drum rack chopping technique to kind of just isolate the best parts. right? And those little bits are providing so much of the accents and the flow of the track is from these tiny little pieces. So there's a bunch of channels of that. There's some more channels here where I was just processing the entire mix. I've used an arpeggiator here to create that kind of transient on it. And then these bits of the door, these are all like extremely mangled. But yeah, that's the project. This project file is available for free download. Yeah, steal all the sounds. Fucking use them. I don't care. Full, just take them and use them. Go for it, people. So shout out Make Noise, shout out Isotope. Thank you for your help, and your technology was an extremely useful tool, extremely powerful tool, and really helped me to make this door hinge song the best it could be. And really the whole thing is all about doors. It's all about doors. So there we go, door hinge themed music for Andrew. Love you, buddy.